And you're tuned into Tech Load, and on the studio line is Ben Reid, Director of MEMIA, a technology consultant, advocate and commentator. A warm welcome. Hi, Ben.
Kia ora, Sandra. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, and tech news at the moment you're loving, Ben.
There's plenty been going on. I mean, I think, there's obviously been some really interesting developments with Australia's relationship with sort of Facebook and Google with the media bargaining law. That's something that's always worth watching, the question of tech regulation. And all the way through to the amazing Perseverance rover's descent, landing on Mars and the amazing sort of video that they beamed back yesterday. That's really quite astounding, really, that you can get sort of GoPro quality video
footage, absolutely,
of the Mars landing. Yes, I saw someone tweet that this is a science fiction video, except it's not.
Yeah, and a lot of people's screens at home, of course, like the pixelation is just beyond belief. I mean, I just look at the screen in awe. I just like, wow, does it really? I can see everything. It looks just so vibrant now.
Yeah, it's an amazing achievement, and realize that the concept of humans actually going across to Mars is probably not as far away as we might have thought maybe 10 years ago.
No, that's what I say. People are starting to book, aren't they? I think somebody last week said that their son might be pressing them to put them on the trip, but that will still take quite a bit of money, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it'd be passenger ferries for a while.
Yeah, and so has anything surprised you recently with tech news other than the first two?
So there's always a lot going on. I mean, as you know, I sort of write a weekly newsletter, memia.substack.com, and every week I'm sort of covering all the latest developments that I'm coming across in emerging tech. That's right across AI. I mean, there's been some incredible developments in what we call generative AI in the last year, really. So you've seen what's known as GPT-3, the general purpose text model, where it's a model with 1.6 billion parameters in, and it's effectively they've parsed all of the text out on the internet and in every library in the world pretty much. And created this sort of deep neural network model of all human language on the planet, and then you're able to then use that model to talk at you and generate text. And so there's examples where people have been able to type the first sentence of a story, and then the AI will basically just continue to write it, and it's almost indistinguishable from as if a human had written it as well. So, and then you're seeing the same technology applied to, what we call deepfake video. So the ability to
create the fake news.
Absolutely, yeah. So to also, generate faces. There's a fantastic site out there called thispersondoesnotexist.com, and every time you go, to that site, you'll see a photo of someone that looks absolutely photorealistic. But doesn't actually exist. It's just a computer-generated photo of an imaginary person.
Wow, and who has access to these extensive human image and language libraries?
Well, the technology is, a lot of it is open source, and GPT-3 was created by OpenAI, but actually Microsoft, as I'm aware of, have got an exclusive license to the source code there, so that's quite interesting. Depending upon the sophistication of the model, a lot of the frameworks that they're built on are open source, and so anyone with the skills and some time can download them and get them working themselves and train them themselves. But in reality, it's really these models do take a lot of money to train, at scale, and so it's, the larger tech companies are really the ones that are able to use this for commercial means.
Yeah, because it probably takes a lot of computer power and a lot of dollars behind that.
It takes a vast amount of computing power. Yeah.
And how far away from quantum computing do you think? Because that's going to be a big
area,
changer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Quantum computing has the promise of far outstripping conventional computing that we've known all our lives. But it's still very much in the lab and in sort of pre-commercial phase. So there was a little bit of an announcement last year when a couple of teams announced that they'd reached what people call quantum supremacy, which is where a quantum computer sort of actually outperformed a conventional computer for the first time. Those are for very, very specific computations. So, and the technology needs, most of the technology that's being developed needs to be kept at super cool temperatures. So
that's right. They haven't solved that problem yet, have they, to be able to contain...
There was a Chinese research team last year that took a different approach using light beams, photons, and they were able to do that at room temperature. But that's sort of very experimental. But all of these are proofs of concept. So, certainly, when you look at the venture capital that's going into quantum computing at the moment, people are betting on this stuff, 5 to 15 years out, would be my impression.
Though I suppose we can just put all the quantum computers in a very cold climate.
Well, with the Earth warming up, that gets harder and harder, right?
Totally. So let's have a look at Australia and the recent Facebook action and regulation of monopolies. What are your thoughts on this news? We've had an update today, haven't we?
Yeah. So, let's go back to the beginning. So, if you think about, when I was growing up, and then if you were to try and advertise your company, then you would have, one of the things you'd have done is rung up the local newspaper and, and paid for a classified ad, either in the classified section at the back of the paper or maybe you'd have had a large display ad. And we've sort of grown up with that. But then, really, 20 years ago, Google and a number of others and Facebook, started working at internet advertising. And as the internet is just growing more and more ubiquitous, pretty much, the majority of classified advertising now has moved online. It's got a number of advantages to print ads in that, because of the amount of data that these companies collect about their audiences, then, companies are able to, very, very precisely target the audience for their ads. And they also, so for example, just whatever you're searching for, you can basically pay for ads or use search engine optimization to bring your company up to the top of the search engine page. And so, bring that forward to today, and you have, newspapers which, form, a function in society. They're the fourth estate, which is there to basically keep the government honest, contribute to society. But they've been stripped of, their traditional revenue stream. And so, it's interesting this has happened all around the world, but in Australia it seems to be in the vanguard. And, I'm sure it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you have, a number of large newspaper groups who are pretty close to government. And so what came out a few weeks ago was, the Australian, what's known as the media bargaining law, which is where the Australian government mandates that these large tech companies, in particular Google and Facebook, the online advertising company, to basically pay a tithe, to bargain with
the individual
traditional media companies. Yeah, but it's to publishers, yeah, and so that is, and basically, and if they can't reach a deal, then the law, as it was worded, was that then we're going to come in and arbitrate, and you'll take the price that gets arbitrated. And so, it's very interesting because and it's really split people, in my understanding, on two sides. And so there's the side that really see Facebook as utterly evil monopolists who really are just out to make a big buck. And let's talk in a moment about how much money they make in Australia and how much tax they pay in Australia, right?
Well, yes, I looked at a recent, sort of figures for, I think it was 2017, 2018, but very recent, and it was 460 million plus revenue in Australia, and then 17 million paid in tax, which is not your classic 30%.
It isn't, and obviously these are international companies, and like all international companies, they've got very highly paid and highly efficient tax accountants whose job it is, and who are very skilled at moving money around the world to optimize the tax paid. And so, that is a challenge, and it's all mixed in with this question of how do you regulate these technology companies or any international company that is basically shipping profits offshore to avoid tax. But yeah, so long and short of it, as you know, Facebook responded to this new law on its way in by basically just shutting off all links to Australian news sources. And
which a lot of people might think is quite sort of criminal if you view Facebook in many ways as a sort of community, sort of, local, regional, national and global utility. Well,
they're not a utility. They're a private company and, owned by shareholders. And so, by the law of that market, then, I think they would argue that they have a duty to shareholders, I guess, to maximise the profits. I'm not saying that I necessarily see that
I get that.
As a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that's the logic of this massive capitalist algorithm that we all find ourselves within is, drives towards that. So, yeah, I definitely don't see that they're a utility. And
but the people, you can understand how people think it is. People might think that they're Facebook and that social media link, and they rely on that for news, and they rely on that for connection, and it could be a matter of urgency for many. And they probably do, whether, it's clearly not, but they may view it as being just as important as electricity or water.
Yes, and that, is, again, goes back to this question of regulation, is how on earth do, countries like Australia, like New Zealand, where I am, actually ensure that there are alternatives to these platforms. So, why are there no competitors to Facebook? Effectively is the question, right?
But some of us know why, because they
bought them all.
They disappeared.
Yeah, well, they bought WhatsApp, they bought Instagram, they bought Oculus as well, which is a virtual reality company. So, arguably, Facebook's used its market dominance, to just to assert itself and to stop competition. But there are, equivalently sized social media companies in China. So China basically excluded Google and Facebook from operating in China, and so you have WeChat, and you have a number of other a whole bunch of very, very innovative technology companies there, but who haven't sort of reached into these Western markets yet.
No, they probably because they have a bigger market themselves, just within China, I would have thought.
Yeah, and lots of cultural differences there that probably don't translate as well, but it's something to watch out for.
Yeah, and then it changed, didn't it, today again? So Facebook has reneged.
Well, you could say Facebook. Depending on who you listen to, this is a back down by Facebook or a back down by the government. Some commentators just think that it was a very poorly crafted law, which really just fundamentally misinterpreted how the internet works, right? Because the way that it was drafted was that effectively Facebook was paying for the right to link to someone else's webpage. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is hyperlinks are absolutely the fundamental piece of the internet, right? This is way back when I was first on it in the early 90s on the World Wide Web, right? The ability to hyperlink from one page to another freely was the entire basis of how the thing works. And so, to suddenly say, 25, 30 years later, actually now you've got to pay, and you've got to pay in a way that doesn't actually express any kind of commercial logic about the value. Because, what Facebook rightly showed with their experiment and switching off for a week is that none of these news sites got any traffic. Their traffic went right down. So the actual, the power relationship between these online media properties and Facebook, which is a massive aggregator, is very imbalanced, and so so depending on who you speak to, and who you read, it's a stand down by either side.
And I would have thought in this era of disinformation and deep fakes and elections being monopolised and a lot of things coming about because of what is out on the internet, you would think that sort of good sourced, fairly sourced news services would be something that we really need.
Well, you'd have thought that, but then, why aren't they making a huge chunk of money doing that is the question, right? So, there's all sorts of, systematic questions to ask here, right? So the whole system at the moment is optimized around clickbait. And so, that ability to capture your attention with something that, hooks right down into the limbic system of your brain, so it completely bypasses your rational senses and makes you click on, you see them at the bottom of all the news pages, just scandal stories or, sex sells a lot, and just basically stuff that grabs your attention and you just click instantly on it. And that's basically how advertising revenue has become optimized.
Is that just a human reaction? Is it just like psychologically that's what humans want to do? They want to be fascinated. They want to click on things that are sensational.
Get it. Well, and it's a dopamine hit as well. So there's a lot of neuropsychology around this that I'm very, very uneducated in, but it's it really just hooks into the architecture of the human brain, which is just very hackable as it turns out. But and that's also the story, like you said, the misinformation, and a lot of the story around the Trump presidency was the fact that argument and scandal and outrage sells ads, sells clicks, sells attention.
And yet it's something that's real, isn't it? So how are we going to like really good sourced, fairly sourced, independent news providers is really what we need to keep us on track with so many things that affect our lives. And so, will there be a decentralization of information, and will business models for news providers need to change?
Well, they are, and I think it's still very exploratory. And I think this is, there's a guy called Benedict Evans who's a industry analyst who I respect, a lot of what he's written on this subject about regulation of tech. And he looks back into history and sees how regulation has evolved for the electricity sector or the banking sector or, the oil refining sector. And, it gets very, very deep and technical and, just very, very granular around, what particular things are allowed and within which boundaries. And tech sectors have really only been around. The advertising tech sector has only been around, as I say, for 20 years. And so, this is probably the opening salvo in a long, war of attrition to regulate the tech sector. Yeah? So there's a long way to go.
Yeah.
And right now, everyone's sort of saying to break up the tech companies. Well, it's a great thing to call for, but the legal basis for doing that needs to be sound.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do behind the scenes.
Yeah, when you start getting down into the detail of this, it becomes very incoherent and very difficult to actually translate that that intuitive sense. There's something wrong in the way that all of our attention is being and our personal private data is basically being aggregated, collected, and sold to advertisers. And we don't get a sense of it.
No, exactly. Well, we might come back to that. We're just going to take a short break.
Yeah. This is 88.3 Southern FM.
And you're listening to Tech Load, and we have Ben Reid on the line, and we're discussing the current tech news that's trending. So let's just pick up on, is it possible to have decentralization of social media and news, and how would that work?
Oh, that's a really big question, right? Because there's two ways of approaching the challenges that we were talking about before the break. One is to use regulation, and that's clearly what the government's been trying to do over the last few weeks. But never forget the opportunities for innovation to come along and actually just to defuse some of these issues, right? So Google and Facebook, they won't be around forever, and there's always just in the same way that they usurped Microsoft, they usurped the traditional news companies. And IBM took over and Microsoft took over from IBM back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a next generation of technology coming. So there's some very interesting, early stage models that I'm keeping an eye on at the moment. And to your point, so decentralization. This is what we sometimes you'll hear about it in the context of blockchain or cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you can sort of have a decentralized computer that's not actually under the control of any one company or any one group of people. There's a number of companies. There's one I'm watching over in New Zealand at the moment, 21E8, so 21E8, and they're working on some very amazing decentralized technology to effectively create information markets, and they're really trying to sort of unbundle what Google ads or Facebook ads do.
Okay, and would that mean that, so for example, a lot of people talk about how, like, with the monopoly of big tech, like all of us, everyone that uses technology and that sort of, is involved with big tech, which is hard not to if you use the internet, that, they're used as collateral for these big monopolies to make money from. And, people talk about, there should be like a universal income that's attached to the benefit that the monopolies gain from the data that's collected. So how would this decentralization work with the, say, crypto and blockchain to be able to perhaps
we've got to be careful that we don't sort of throw terms like crypto and blockchain around too loosely. Those are just sort of underlying technologies that form part of these solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So look, it's a very effectively what these global ad tech giants do is that they collect huge amounts of private data, and arguably personal data that has value about all of their users online. So every time that you click on any link, anytime you do any Google search, anytime you like something on Facebook, or your eyes or your mouse hovers over an image, right? They're collecting this data on you, and they're effectively profiling you as someone that has certain interests and has is interested in buying certain things, right? And then they sell that information in aggregate to advertisers.
Oh, the profile of individuals, even.
Yeah, well, from a legal point of view, data protection, privacy legislation in most countries protects against that selling of individual information, but in the aggregate, then that information does have value, right? And they effectively own the casino there. They own the marketplace, and they are able to basically hold that value that they received, I'd say, for free. I mean, basically Google are providing a search engine to half of the world's internet users or more, that provides amazing utility. I was saying, can you imagine living in a world without a major search engine, and that it's so the competitors that are out there to it are definitely not as effective for me.
Now, have you used DuckDuckGo? Because apparently
I have, yes, and look, it's an interesting experience because I would say at least one time out of two I don't find what I want on DuckDuckGo straight away, and so I'll just go much more to the conventional Google search. I think that will change, and I think that's another aspect that will happen. Is so DuckDuckGo is a search engine that does not collect your private information, right? They literally just their only revenue source is ads based on the search engine terms, so they're not cross-referencing you into an advertiser's demographic. Anyway, so if I go back to say what the companies like 21E8 are doing, as I understand it, is that they are effectively putting you in control of your personal data, and then enable you to sell that personal data out into a marketplace, and effectively sell your attention to advertisers who may want to find you in that marketplace. But doing it so in a way that maintains your privacy and actually enables, it takes away the cut that the middleman, Facebook and Google currently takes. Watch out for that one.
Yeah, so I think it's not really all that well advertised, and I've known about it for a while, but I do forget about it.
Yeah, very, very early stage startup stage. So they're currently building out infrastructure layers. So it'll be years before it becomes real. But then as you'll see with any of these technologies, you see them coming, and then all of a sudden they're ubiquitous.
And then, of course, we used to have, like Yahoo.com, we used to have a lot of other search engines, didn't we? But then Google took the lead.
Yeah, and that was, a combination of having a better piece of technology, better product, but also, really strong capital strategy and, lots of investment piling in.
Yeah. So I don't know, have you seen the film Social Dilemma?
Yes.
Yeah, and that was, what did you get out of that? What was your major takeaway?
It's a good question. So I mean, this definitely articulates, these challenges of, the major social media companies and the major tech companies, optimizing for clicks and optimizing, effectively to keep your attention on the screen longer and longer and longer. And as I say, the human brain is very hackable and is very vulnerable to some of these effects. So, some of these social media user interfaces are absolutely designed.
Yeah, to be addictive.
To be completely addictive. It's the same thing as if you're on a poker machine, right?
That's right. How about when at the dinner table and all the mobile devices were placed in the glass jar that was locked, and then one of the children, young adolescents, sort of lost it, and she definitely went and got that phone, didn't she?
When he got it. But I think that's quite understandable, and
yes.
But the flip side of that is that we're all in many ways cyborgs now. We are half biological and we're half machine, because so much of our social interactions and our our memories and our the way that we express ourselves, and I think this is very true of the younger generation. We express ourselves digitally, and so it would almost be like cutting off, suddenly losing the ability to speak in some ways. These devices. So I think there's a huge amount of positivity about the communication and the entertainment and the social the ability to express myself that these tools bring. I think that the challenge is that currently they're tied to this very aggressive American capitalist venture capitalist model of maximizing
attention screen time to keep people hooked at their device.
To maximize profit.
Yeah. And of course, there's more to living than just being attached to a digital device. And, there's a lot of workplaces and companies and employers and employees, speak about, well, where's the communication, The person sits beside me, yet they won't talk to me, and they just send me an email, like, where's the communication? And people saying, well, the people that are coming up, they don't know how to communicate. And then we fast forward to, I suppose now, and so it launched last year, it's still in beta, Clubhouse. So, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Audio only.
Yes, it's like a throwback. In New Zealand, there used to be, back in the 1960s, I think 70s, or the rural areas had these shared copper line telephones, and so 10 or 20 houses would all be on the same phone line, and each with a different ring, and they became known as the party lines, because you'd be able to all chat to each other forever on unmetered phone lines.
That would have been amazing when you're so isolated.
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. So I think Clubhouse has been was probably launched, I think, post-COVID, I understand. So a lot of people who have been isolated all around the world, who have been given the invite for the beta Clubhouse, are probably really absolutely loving being able to speak to a variety of people and a variety of rooms on a variety of topics. Yeah,
I mean, it's sort of, it's very, very well funded by Andreessen Horowitz and other venture capital firms. And so, it's getting a lot of hype around it. And like you say, it's very exclusive. So only if you've got an invite, only if you've got an iPhone, can you use it. And, I'm a bit wary. I've seen there's a really good article by a journalist called John Norton in The Guardian that I linked to in my newsletter today. And it's, he's talking there about how, you can't use Clubhouse unless you give it access to all the contacts on your phone. And, so you just get this sense that they're basically just hoovering up all the data of these 1%ers, using this sort of cool, new social phenomenon, and then using that to build a social graph.
Database.
Database, yeah.
But isn't...
And I mean, the other thing that was really interesting was just that the Stanford Internet Observatory, who, a bunch of techies, they basically did an analysis on the app itself, and they discovered that potentially there's backdoors to, that could potentially
lead to China.
Listen in, yeah. And I think you've just got, with any of these tools, there's a question of trust, right? So I don't know, I'm a bit skeptical about it. And sitting in a room chatting away, socially to people, is that's what we all did in the 90s, wasn't it?
Do you think it's a step backwards? Do you think it's a step backwards or is it a step forwards? So there's been so much texting going on and just like viewing and texting and people having conversations with themselves. You see their expressions as they text something or on their laptops where really they're just talking to themselves, but, they're trying to communicate. Is this actually, it seems like a step backwards, but is this a step forward, getting people talking again?
Again. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's certainly a play to try and disrupt the podcast market. So, podcasts are all over the place, and then there's 50 different podcasting platforms, and there's a big land grab at the moment, by companies like Spotify and others to, really effectively become this global premium podcast brand where, that everybody comes to. I can see, Clubhouse is, again, it comes back to this, your attention. And so if you're spending your attention listening into a Clubhouse call rather than listening into a podcast, then the way that Silicon Valley investors look at it is that that's got more value.
Oh, and you think they might monetize that, or it's just in the early stages, so we don't know how that will be monetized. But interesting enough, yes, I am a Clubhouse member, and I think it was on Saturday, and I was thinking to myself, because I've been thinking a lot about podcasting, and there's a lot of rooms that are about podcasting, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm wondering whether Joe Rogan's been on, and then it was 1 hour later. I was, I think I was in the AI singing room, and then
singing room.
Yes, and I gave some words so that the AI could generate some lyrics, and people were singing the lyrics on the spot. So that was quite interesting. And then someone came on and said, "Oh, Joe Rogan is in a room." So that was, and I did pop in. I was, there's obviously the systems crashed, yeah, and so that was really interesting. So yeah, so I think that it's definitely. I think that from time to time they're getting some, big names in.
It's not massively different to what we're doing right now, right?
No, it's a conversation.
And then it's pumping out across sort of analog airwaves. And so it's, a digital distribution method and for, a group call. I think, it's certainly a play. But like I say, it's, there's no way the investors in it are, investing for the good of humanity, right?
So where does humane technology and where do we all fit in with humane technology? How are we going to increase that in our general orbit and everyday use of technology?
Look, there's a real tension between the neophytes like me that really can't wait to hear about the latest development and get my hands on the latest gadget, and then people that are sort of more resistant to change and cautious about it and feeling a bit more threatened by it, I think. And so and I think that all sides of that, all ends of that spectrum need to be considered when you answer that question. I definitely think that governments need to engage, like the Australian government has on the Facebook episode. Although I think some of their tactics there were possibly, not sure that they've got the result that they wanted.
No, and I think you said you gave me a quote. You said that it had been quoted that a sort of the PM had said that Australians are adopters, not creators, which was quite an interesting line. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that was at the launch of Australian government's sort of technology industry strategy last year, which was very much one of adoption rather than invention. And if that is the case, and it's no wonder that you've got foreign companies, tech companies coming in, dominating that industry, right? Because you just don't have any domestic players. And there's other factors in play, such as just access to large pools of venture capital. A lot of this is driven by venture capital.
And of course, smaller markets have to, I suppose, pick their areas of tech, and they do need a certain amount of funding to actually have a chance in the global arena. But, certainly Australia and New Zealand, we do have some very successful global technology players.
We have some amazing technology companies, but then there's lots of small economies out there in the world, with the ability to share, open source technology, and so effectively create a different model to, a venture capital funded, Silicon Valley tech giants, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so, I think that countries like Australia, like New Zealand, like Singapore, and UK, Europe as well, really need to have a technology strategy that involves, that means we're not just going to be technology takers from whoever's got the best price. Because this stuff is actually strategic to our society and strategic to our economy. But the problem, as I see it, is that we have elected politicians who, none of them come from the software industry. None of them come from, have any background in innovation.
So you think we need politicians, not just in Australia, but in other countries too, that have entrepreneurial experience or have industry experience involving technology.
Entrepreneurial experience and technology sector understanding and interest, right? And I think that's something that I've yet to see is, I'm a great fan of, actually, in Australia, you've got a great guy, Ed Music, and I caught up with him at a AI for Good event in Bangkok a few years ago, and he's I would say probably the most technologically conversant MP I've ever met in the world. And so, more like Ed, I think would be a great start.
Okay, we'll be back. And you're with TechLoad, and we're going to have a look at, what is this? It is MetaU. What is MetaU all about, Ben?
Oh, look, this is just to finish off, there's really, as I was saying, there's lots of really interesting AI technology, and you can use AI to generate images. So I was talking about, this is not a real person.com earlier. So, but there's a really good story this week where a famous sort of podcaster, or semi-famous, basically went down to a studio with a green screen and got a sort of 3D model taken of herself. And then they then animated that with her voice. They recorded her voice. And then that's effectively then an animatronic puppet that you can basically put in front of a news broadcast. You can put it into virtual reality.
You can direct and program that meta you to do anything.
You can tell it what to say. You can tell it what to say. You can in your voice and with your face.
It's a virtual robot.
A virtual you. I could be sort of on the beach sipping pina coladas while our AI meta yous are out there doing the hard work for us.
Dude, people could have a lot of fun with that, right?
Yeah, well, it certainly is a way of scaling yourself, in work. But yeah, you were saying that it doesn't replace, that face-to-face contact. Who knows? But certainly for those that are, out there making a living or just spending a lot of time on Zoom, I suppose that's a really interesting question. Is could your, sort of your virtual me
replace you in Zoom? I'd love that.
Replace you on a Zoom call.
I find Zoom quite boring, so I love that. Yeah, I'm one of those people that enjoy real life. I think you pick up information if you're a sensitive type or an empath, and I don't know, it's just more interesting to have real people in the real world. I just find that Zoom is just that digital barrier that I just feel removed from.
And it's very interesting. I'm probably the other end of that spectrum from you. I've actually really enjoyed the working from home aspect over the last year, and in a way that I've been able to interact with people, all over the world, with far more ease than before. So I think it's also different personality types. There's some research out there that shows that, sort of more extrovert characters are, more comfortable in person, and more introvert characters, may prefer that virtual.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose what we really need is a balance for good living. Now, flying fruit pickers.
Just to finish off, so there's been lots of advances in robotics over the last few years. I mean, you've seen the videos of Boston Dynamics, Spot the Dog, and the robot doing acrobatics and so on.
So this robot can find the fruit and pick it off the tree.
Yeah, so there's a lot of investment going into the fruit and horticulture industry, automating. It's a real challenge, right? Orchards and vineyards, they really can't find enough workers to do. It's really backbreaking.
Yeah,
so it's just an advance here where you have a flying drone with an arm attached that's able to basically spot.
That's right, and we've got two more to cover. Smart wool, what is it in one line?
A smart wool.
In one line.
Not really technology. It's basically regenerative farming for merino. We'll talk about that next time.
And two-way futurism, one line.
That's a long story.
Not willing to go there. It's just like it's like the past and the present, but some of us already live like that. So that was a bit mind blowing. So that's something to look up and to discuss next time. Thank you so much, Ben, for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Sandra.
And great to have your company here on Tech Load. Join me, Sandra Spencer, next week on Southern FM with more tech news, info and experts, Wednesdays 6 to 7.
Bye.